Alien bride shipped to the wrong address. But everything changed when she met his prosthetic-legged son. The stasis cradle cracked open with a wet hiss and a breath of air that smelled wrong. Valea Rin dragged in her first lungful of non-recycled atmosphere and immediately started coughing. It was too dry, laced with metal dust and faint engine fumes. Not Helios Station. Not the polished, climate-controlled hub she'd been promised in the contract. Frost smoked off the inside of the pod. Amber indicators flickered from in transit to a smug, uncaring green. Delivery complete. Destination: Kestrel 3 Surface Transfer Yard Sector Gamma, the pod's cheerful synth voice announced. Thank you for choosing Frontier Match Logistics. Valea squinted past the steaming hatch. The world outside was a wash of rust and glare, a low sky stained ochre by suspended dust, pressed down on rows of squat prefab buildings and skeletal cranes. Conveyor belts carried ore toward a refinery that grumbled like some half-asleep beast. Humans in stained work coveralls moved between structures with the shambling exhaustion of people who'd been tired for years. This is not Helios Station, Valea muttered, stepping down onto the cracked concrete. Her boots scraped grit. The gravity tugged a little harder than she liked. Her gold-green eyes narrowed. Unless the brochure was wildly inaccurate. She turned back to the pod. Route error, she rasped, voice rusty from cryo-sleep. Confirm, I am contracted to Director Sloan Cade, Helios Administrative Ring. This is... The pod's external screen flashed a cheery, have a productive day icon. Then the engine spooled up. Wait! Valea grabbed the frame. You malfunctioning tin... The pod lifted, shrugging her off like lint. Backwash blasted her coat and her long indigo hair as it rose, pivoted, and arrowed into the mustard sky, leaving a spiral of disturbed dust and one furious alien bride marooned on a slab of concrete in the middle of nowhere. Valea stood alone, jaw clenched, the metal cuffs at her wrists humming faintly under her skin in response to her spike of anger. She pressed a palm over them, smothering the instinctive surge of power. Not here, not in the open. She took stock instead. She still wore the dress Helios liaison had insisted on for human aesthetics, a fitted dark coat over a corseted bodice, long skirts slit for movement, soft boots. Her people would have considered it archaic and inefficient, but humans loved their period dramas. The universe had a sense of humor. Valea smoothed the coat, squared her shoulders, and marched off the landing pad toward the nearest sign of officialdom. Somewhere on this dust-choked rock there had to be an admin node, a comms uplink, a sane adult capable of saying, yes, obviously, this is a mistake, let's get you on the next shuttle. She really hoped so, because the alternative was that the universe had just shrugged and dropped her, along with her very dangerous secret, in the middle of a frontier mine by accident. And Valea Rin did not believe in accidents. The settlement wasn't big enough to deserve the word city, but it was trying hard. Prefab habitats ringed the refinery and its towering exhaust stacks. Power lines crisscrossed overhead like webbing. A flickering hollow sign near the central thoroughfare declared Kestrel 3 Extraction Site 14, building tomorrow out of today. Whoever wrote that had never inhaled this much rust. Valea moved along the main street, drawing looks. Her skin, a soft violet with faint bioluminescent tracery at her temples, marked her immediately as off-world. Her eyes, slit-pupilled and bright, tracked every angle of approach. The cuffs on her wrists, plain brushed metal to casual observation, itched with the urge to unfold, to connect to the subtle currents of the thin atmosphere. No, stay invisible. A few humans nodded warily. One or two offered sympathetic half-smiles, the way people do when they see someone obviously lost. No one stopped. After nearly an hour of wandering and getting only vague gestures when she asked for administration, Valea drifted into what passed for a residential zone. The buildings here were slightly less ugly. Personal touches on door frames, laundry strung between units, the metallic clatter of someone fixing something badly. That's when she saw the boy. He sat on a low step at the edge of a narrow lane, elbows on his knees, gaze fixed on nothing. 12, maybe. Dark hair shaved short on the sides and too long on top, sticking up like he'd lost an argument with a static field. His right leg, from mid-thigh down, was a prosthetic, exposed pistons and carbon struts, wired into a socket that disappeared under worn cargo shorts. The prosthesis was functional, ugly, and obviously due for maintenance. Valea slowed. Her people had long since gone beyond such crude solutions. They regrew limbs in vats, printed synaptic scaffolds. But the boy's leg was still beautiful in a different way, a human solution, built out of stubbornness and scrap. She approached. Boots crunching softly, he glanced up. Brown eyes, sharp and curious, met hers. He didn't flinch at the sight of her alien markings. Instead, his face lit up with quick interest. "Whoa," he breathed. "You're purple." "Violet," she corrected automatically. "Violet." He nodded, as if this were deeply meaningful. "Cool." He rummaged in the small sling bag at his side and produced a fruit, a lumpy, fist-sized thing with mottled teal skin and tiny, crystalline nodules. He held it out seriously. "First rule of Kestrel," he said. "You look lost. Somebody should feed you before the dust finishes the job." Valea blinked. "Is this a local custom?" "It's my custom." His mouth twitched. "I'm Arlo. What's your name?" "Valea Rin." She hesitated, then sat beside him on the step, careful to keep her skirt clear of an oil stain. Her cuffs hummed faintly at the proximity to his prosthesis. She quietly damped the feedback. "Valea," he repeated, testing the syllables. "You one of the contract brides?" She almost choked on the fruit. "Is it that obvious?" she managed after a beat, tart juice bright on her tongue. Wherever it had grown, it wasn't entirely poisonous. Arlo shrugged. "We don't get many people stepping off single-use pods in fancy coats unless they owe the corp money or agreed to marry someone higher up the ladder." He squinted down the lane. "You don't look desperate enough for the first one." "That's oddly flattering," she said. "You're welcome." He swung his prosthetic idly. The servos whined. Valea eyed the joint angles, reflexively mapping stress loads. "I was supposed to arrive at Helios Station," she said in no. "Director Sloan Cade. 5-year partnership contract. Stipend, quarters, diplomatic duties, all very respectable." She let a bitter note slip out. "In theory." "And instead you got Kestrel," Arlo said. "Yeah, our shipping hub's kind of a joke." "I noticed," Valea murmured. "You got anyone to yell at about it?" he asked. "Because you're doing that thing with your mouth my dad does when the power grid drops." Before she could answer, a voice called from up the lane. "Arlo, where are you?" The tone carried steel under the worry. Arlo brightened. "Here." The man who strode around the corner had the look of someone built to lift heavy things and argue with stubborn machinery. He was tall and broad-shouldered in a worn utility jacket, dark skin dusted with the same rust film as everyone else's. Stubble shadowed his jaw, and a faint scar climbed from his collar into his hairline like a pale lightning fork. His eyes, gray-green like storm glass, locked immediately onto Valea. They sharpened. "Arlo," his voice was low, controlled. "What did we say about talking to strangers on the transfer side?" "She's not a stranger," Arlo said cheerfully. "She's Valea. She looks like spilled Aurora, and she was shipped to the wrong place." There were probably better introductions. Valea rose, feeling the weight of that steady gaze. "There's been an error in the routing system," she said, keeping her tone polite. "My pod dropped me here instead of Helios. I'm trying to locate your administrative office." The man took her in. The coat, the cuffs, the faint glow at her temples with the wary calculation of someone cataloging variables in a failing system. Rowan Hale, he said finally, offering a work-roughened hand. Chief systems engineer for this particular mess. And Arlo's father. Valea took his hand. Human skin, warm and calloused, grounded her more than she expected. Valea Rin. Frontier match screwed up your destination, he asked. It appears so. Rowan exhaled through his nose. Comms. Uplink's been intermittent for 3 days. Solar flare activity fried half our relays. Next scheduled shuttle doesn't hit orbit for 12 days? He glanced at Arlo. 13, Arlo corrected. Ms. Okafor made us calculate it in school. Said it would teach patience. So, Rowan's jaw flexed. Best case, you're stuck on this rock almost 2 weeks until we can put you on anything heading outward. Valea's stomach sank. Her savings assumed she'd be on Helios with housing provided. The contract didn't cover accidental detours to nowhere. I can pay for lodging, she said quickly, in a boarding house, hostel, corporate dorm, whatever you have. I just need access to a terminal and priority on the first outbound shuttle. Rowan rubbed the back of his neck, eyes flicking toward the distant refinery and back. We don't exactly have a hotel district, he said dryly. Corp bunks are full, and they charge 3 weeks' wages for a mattress and a shared recycler. Dad, Arlo said suddenly, hey, she can stay with us. Rowan's head snapped around. Arlo! What? Arlo spread his hands. We have Uncle Bram's old room. It's been empty since he transferred to the orbital rigs. You keep saying the house is too quiet. She needs somewhere to sleep that isn't a tool shed. Valea held up both hands. I wouldn't presume... Rowan's gaze cut back to her, measuring. She met it evenly. Let him see the exhaustion, the wariness, but not desperation. Never that. Colony regs do say we're obligated to shelter stranded travelers, he said at last. The old-timers took that seriously before the Corp made everything transactional. Dad cooks okay, Arlo added, and I can show you the good vents to sit on when the weather's awful. Rowan pinched the bridge of his nose, then sighed. You're relentless. Genetic, Arlo said, from you. A corner of Rowan's mouth twitched like he was fighting a smile and mostly winning. All right, he said finally, turning back to Valea. If you're willing to put up with cramped quarters and a kid who never stops talking, you can stay with us until we get you on the next shuttle. Warmth bloomed in her chest, unexpected and sharp. She bowed her head slightly. Thank you, Valea said. I'll find a way to compensate you. Credits, repairs, atmospheric tuning. Rowan's eyes narrowed at that last word, but he just jerked his chin down the lane. Come on, then, before the evening dust rolls in. Arlo grinned and without hesitation grabbed Valea's hand, tugging her along. His prosthetic leg clicked and hummed in uneven rhythm with his biological one, but he moved with the effortless confidence of someone who'd long ago stopped letting it define his limits. Valea let him lead, the subtle hum of her hidden tech sinking instinctively to the rhythms of this harsh little world. Maybe the universe wasn't done with her after all. Rowan's place was a standard Corp prefab that had been aggressively bullied into becoming a home. The outer shell was the same dull composite as every other unit, but the inside had been fought for. Someone had pried up the cheap flooring and laid mismatched boards. Shelves made from repurposed crate panels lined the walls, filled with actual printed books, small mechanical projects, and clusters of rocks Arlo proudly identified as the pretty ones I nicked from the slag heaps. Plants struggled in repurposed parts bins near the single window. A cracked hollow frame on a side table cycled through grainy images. A younger Rowan, laughing. A woman with curls like spun copper leaning against his shoulder. A much smaller Arlo between them. Both legs intact, holding up a model shuttle with grubby triumph. Valea's chest tightened. It's a mess, Rowan said gruffly, closing the door behind them. We don't get a lot of guests. It's... Valea searched for a word that wasn't better than anything I expected ever again. Lived in. Arlo beamed. I told you she was cool. He launched into a whirlwind tour. That's the kitchen, Dad's domain of mysterious burnt things. That corner's the workshop. Don't touch the open casings unless you like being mildly electrocuted. Down that hall's my room, Dad's room, and the spare. Rowan cleared his throat. We'll put fresh linens on Bram's bunk, bathrooms at the end of the hall. Water's restricted sometimes, so shower fast, unless you enjoy lectures about reservoirs. Water's a shared resource, Arlo recited, mimicking someone's cadence. Waste is theft, blah blah. Valea smiled despite herself. We rationed water during the war too, she said. A different reason. Same shortage. Rowan's gaze flicked to her, curious, but he didn't press. I'll get dinner going, Armies, he said instead. Arlo, let her breathe for 5 minutes, yeah? Arlo bounced on his prosthetic. The servo squealed. Valea winced internally at the stress profile. How long since that leg had a proper tune? She asked, nodding toward it. Arlo looked down. Mr. Paresh tightened a bolt last month. Mr. Paresh is a welder, Rowan called from the kitchen. And a menace. He's fast, Arlo protested. Valea crouched, keeping her movement slow, non-threatening. May I? She asked. Arlo shrugged. Sure. She studied the joint. Your techs did good work with what they had, she said honestly. But your extension servo's compensating for a misaligned socket. That's why it whines under load. Arlo's eyes widened. You know prosthetics? I know systems she said. Loads and flows. Bodies and atmospheres aren't as different as people think. Rowan leaned in the doorway, watching her. You an engineer, Valea Rin? She straightened. I was, she said. Before the war. Before other things. Her fingertips brushed the cuffs on her wrists. For a second, the etched patterns flared, almost too faint to notice. Rowan noticed. He didn't comment. Come eat before the stew overcooks, he said instead. Dinner was thick vegetable stew and flatbread warmed on a warped induction plate. It was also, Valea suspected, one of the best meals she'd had in years. Not because of the seasoning, it was aggressively practical, but because of the way Arlo chattered about school and old vids and which ventilation ducts whistled in a pleasing way when the external wind picked up. Because of the way Rowan listened, quiet and attentive, adding dry commentary that made Arlo snort into his cup. Because it felt, for the first time since she'd fled her shattered homeworld, like she'd stepped into a life still capable of warmth. So you were going to marry a man you've never met, Arlo said at one point, spoon halfway to his mouth. Arlo, Rowan warned. It's all right, Valea said. Yes. Director Cade and I had exchanged messages, negotiated expectations. He needed a partner with diplomatic training and knowledge of atmospheric engineering for Helios's expansion projects. I needed safe passage and a fresh start. And no one asked whether you liked each other, Arlo said bluntly. That was secondary, she said carefully. That's messed up, Arlo decided. Mom always said you should only marry someone who makes the air feel easier to breathe. Rowan's hand froze on his cup. Silence settled. Arlo, he said quietly. Clear the dishes, please. Arlo seemed to realize he'd stepped somewhere tender. Right, sorry. Just saying what she said. He gathered plates and retreated to the sink. Rowan stared into his stew. My wife, Leon, was a habitat designer, he said after a moment. His voice was even, but his knuckles were white. She died in a tunnel collapse 2 years ago. Arlo lost his leg. I lost everything else. Valea's throat tightened. I'm sorry, she said. Rowan nodded once, brusque, accepting, but not inviting pity. We got through it. That's what humans do out here. We get through. HFY, Valea thought wryly. Humanity. Yeah? It had been a meme on the networks before the collapse, jokes about the ridiculous things humans did to survive and to love. Somehow she'd ended up in the punchline. She looked at the man across from her, at the boy humming to himself over the dishes, and felt a decision settle quietly in her bones. 2 weeks, she told herself. 2 weeks stranded on a rock run by a corporation that would sell air by the breath if they could. She could survive that. She'd survived worse. She just hadn't expected to find something here worth fighting for. By the third morning, Valea knew the rhythm of Kestrel 3 better than she liked. Shift sirens howled at dawn. The sky went from dull, bruised yellow to harsh, over-bright white as the star rose behind dust. The refinery woke like an angry beast, venting vapor and noise. A thin mist of processed moisture condensed along the inner lip of the settlement's skimpy force canopy, then evaporated before it could be of use to anyone. "Efficient," Valea muttered, watching the shimmering margin over her cup of reconstituted coffee. Rowan snorted. "Corp specs," he said. "Cheapest dome that meets minimum safety regs." "You could do better," she said without thinking. His eyebrows lifted. "You've barely seen my work." "I've seen your patch jobs." She nodded toward the nearest power conduit, where a suspiciously elegant reroute snaked around a manufacturer's defect. "They're smarter than the original designs." He studied her over his mug. "You see a lot for someone passing through." "I spent the last decade keeping a dying world barely livable," she said calmly. "You notice edges when the air itself is trying to kill you?" His gaze dipped to her cuffs again. "Atmospheric engineer," he said, "among other things." He let it go for now. Valea walked Arlo to the small school dome on the settlement's eastern side. Children in mismatched uniforms waved, stared, whispered. Ms. Okafor, the teacher Arlo adored, gave Valea a nod that said thank you for existing. The boy needed a new audience. On the way back, the wind picked up. Dust hissed against the dome field, faint blue sparks feathering where particles hit charged air. Her cuffs vibrated. Valea stopped, frowning. The field shouldn't be fluctuating that way. She pressed 2 fingers to the metal bands and quietly let them open just a hair to the network of gas and charge around the colony. Patterns unfurled in her perception, temperature gradients, pressure zones, the lazy swirl of the limited atmosphere around Kestrel's thin dome. And something else. A repeating ripple. A deliberate modulation of the dome's frequency at the eastern quadrant just beyond the ore pits. "Someone's poking your air," she said under her breath. She snapped the cuffs shut and walked faster. Rowan was at the systems hub when she arrived, arguing with a stocky woman in a faded security vest. The main board behind them flashed amber in too many places. "Imani, you can't just shut down half the drills, see," Rowan was saying. "We're already behind quota. Corp will have our hides." "And if I don't, the whole Eastern Dome could fail," the security chief shot back. "I've got 3 separate sensors flagging pressure anomalies." "Atmospheric bleed?" Valea asked, stepping in. Both turned. Imani's eyebrows climbed. "You brought home a violet-skinned goddess of doom and didn't tell me?" she asked Rowan. "Shame on you." "Imani Chen," Rowan said. "Security and emergency response. Imani, this is Valea Rin. Stuck here because Frontier Match can't count." "Pleasure," Imani said. "You one of the sensor techs?" "Atmospheric specialist," Valea replied. "From farther out than your average corp contractor." Imani glanced at Rowan. "You checked her creds?" Rowan gave a small shrug. "She looked at Arlo's leg and named the exact servo that's misaligned." Imani whistled. "Okay, that's better than half our medtechs. Come look at this then." She gestured Valea toward the board. Lines of values scrolled past. Pressure differentials, temp gradients, dome field oscillations. It was a mess. A hasty overlay of corp-based systems and Rowan's smarter, hacked-in safeguards. Underneath the noise, Valea saw the same ripple she'd felt outside. A repeating logic. A call and response pattern. "This isn't random failure," she said slowly. "Someone's injecting false data into your environmental loops." "Sabotage?" Imani's mouth flattened. "Controlled destabilization," Valea corrected. "Whoever's doing it understands atmospheric feedback cycles well enough to make them look like noise until they tip." Rowan's jaw clenched. "We're not connected to the wider net," he said. "They're too remote, not worth the bandwidth. This has to be internal." "And aimed at the eastern quadrant," Imani added. School's right on that edge. A cold knot formed under Valea's ribs. I need closer access or journals, she said, and my own tools. Rowan stared at her cuffs. Those bracelets you never take off, he said. That's your kit, isn't it? Prototype terraforming interfaces, she admitted. The last ones of their kind. Both sides of our civil war wanted them as weapons. I wanted them nowhere near anyone with a target list. So you ran, he said. Yes. Imani blew out a breath. And we just happened to get you by mistake, she said, right when someone starts messing with our air. I don't believe in coincidence, Valea said, not on this scale. Alarms bellowed before anyone could respond. The board flashed red in the corner. Eastern Dome pressure drop. Child Hab modules at risk. Rowan moved. Arlo's school, he snapped. Imani. Already on evac, she said, hitting her comm. All units converge on School Dome Beta. Move, people. Valea's cuffs burned. This is what they want, she said. Panic, chaos, the perfect smokescreen to grab what they came for. Imani frowned. They? Valea met Rowan's eyes. The Dominion Shroud, she said quietly. The faction that won our war. They like to arrive after the first disaster and offer protection in exchange for obedience. Rowan's mouth flattened. That sounds like every corporation I've ever worked for. Corporations don't usually destabilize domes, Valea said. The Shroud does. And they've been hunting me since I ran with these. She flexed her wrists. The cuffs responded, unfolding around her forearms in a cascade of light and shifting metal. Holographic glyphs sprang into being, streaming data. Imani swore. You brought alien magic into my control room, she said. Why is it always on my shift? Rowan grabbed his jacket. You can fix this? I can try, Valea said, but I need to be near the failure zone. Rowan didn't hesitate. Then we're going to the school. He didn't say my son is there. He didn't have to. The fear in his eyes said it for him. Rowan's utility rover chewed the dusty streets with grim determination. Emergency sirens wailed overhead as they shot through intersections, scattering workers and drones alike. Valea knelt in the passenger seat, arms braced on the dashboard, cuffs blazing. Her perception expanded beyond the confines of the rover, sliding into the currents of air and energy around the dome. The atmosphere was thin, but it carried information like any other fluid. The eastern quadrant flickered like a stressed muscle. Pressure gradients dipped and surged, just shy of catastrophic. Somebody was playing the system like an instrument, plucking at its weak points. Rowan drove like the road owed him money. Talk to me, he said, eyes locked on the path ahead. They're not trying to blow the dome outright, Valea said. Not yet. They're creating localized pressure vacuums, enough to scare people, not enough to kill them. Why? He snapped. To drive everyone into one place, she said. To corral them. If you want to find a specific target in a chaotic environment, you compress the variables. Like flushing rats from a pipe, Rowan muttered. So who's the rat? You? Me, she said. And my tech. He glanced at her, jaw tight. You sure about that? I was one of 3 lead designers on the Atmospheric Harmonics project, she said flatly. We built machines that could coax a dead world into breathing. The Shroud wanted to weaponize it. Turn breathable zones on and off over cities. I sabotaged their prototypes and ran with the only interfaces tuned for healing, not killing. Rowan gave a short, humorless laugh. And Kestrel got you instead of some neat little corporate spouse. My pod shouldn't have even been able to route here without authorization, she said. Someone with access to Frontier Match's backend redirected me. The Shroud, or someone playing their game. The rover crested a rise. The school dome came into view across a wide, cracked plaza, a smaller hemisphere grafted onto the main colony shield, its surface flickering with stressed blue light. A crowd had formed outside, teachers herding children, security staff shouting orders, parents pushing against the line. Arlo, Rowan breathed. He slammed the rover into a skid that would have impressed a stunt pilot and was out of the cab before it fully stopped. Valea followed, her boots hitting the concrete at a run. The air near the dome tasted wrong, too thin, too charged. Her cuffs ached with the effort of compensating. She pushed through the crowd with Rowan at her side. Imani stood near the main hatch, shouting into her comm. "Pressure's dropping in Sector C," she barked. "Get those kids out of the lab wing now." "Imani!" Rowan yelled. "Arlo!" "Inside," she snapped. "Second floor classroom. We're trying to clear just—" The dome field rippled violently. The hatch locks clanged as emergency protocols seized control. The main door sealed with a chunk of finality that made the crowd collectively flinch. "Manual override's dead," Imani snarled, slamming a fist against the panel. "Dome's in lockdown." Inside, through the transparent composite, Valea could see children pressed against inner windows, eyes wide. Teachers tried to keep order, and there, halfway up the nearest stairwell, clinging to the rails and squinting through the warped view, was Arlo. Rowan's breath hitched. Valea stepped forward, cuffs blazing. "Back up," she said calmly. Imani stared at her. "What are you—" "Making you a door," Valea said. She sank to one knee, pressing her palms to the warmed metal of the exterior wall. The cuffs unfolded fully now, rings of alien alloy locking into place around her forearms. Light spilled across her skin, tracing old scars. She reached, not just with her fingertips, but with the part of her mind that had learned to speak the language of gases and pressure and heat. The dome's hum vibrated in her bones, angry and lopsided. "Your dome's on factory default," she said through clenched teeth. "Rigid threshold values, zero adaptivity. It's like trying to sing with a collapsed lung." "Can you fix it?" Rowan asked hoarsely. "I can teach it to breathe," she said. She pushed. Her tech interfaced with the dome field, not through wires or code, but through harmonics, matching frequencies and then nudging them. The shroud's interfering pattern reared up in her perception like a barbed knot. She unpicked it, thread by furious thread. The dome ceased trying to slam shut around the school like a clenching fist. Pressure equalized fraction by stubborn fraction. The lock on the main hatch shuddered, caught between Corp protocol and Valea's override. "Manual now," she gasped. Imani jammed a pry bar into the hatch seam and swore creatively. Rowan joined her. Other colonists piled in with a tortured shriek the hatch gave. Air rushed but did not explode outward. Valea held the pressure on a knife edge, sweat beading along her hairline. "Go," she croaked. They went. Rowan disappeared into the school. Valea held the dome steady while the evacuation poured through the improvised exit. Children stumbled into the courtyard, coughing but alive. Teachers followed, herding and counting. Imani shouted orders directing them toward the nearest shelter modules. Arlo was one of the last out. He hopped through the warped doorway, prosthetic leg catching on the threshold. Rowan caught him before he face-planted, hauling him into a rib-crushing hug. "You okay?" Rowan demanded, voice raw. "Dad," Arlo wheezed. "Can't breathe. You're squishing me." Valea let the dome field settle into a new, more stable pattern, and finally released the connection. Her legs wobbled as she straightened. Arlo wriggled free and limped straight to her. "That was you," he said, awe and something like pride in his voice. "You glowed." "Side effect," she said, panting. "We'll work on subtlety later." Rowan looked at her like she'd just reached into a collapsing star and dragged his son out by hand. "Those cuffs," he said slowly. "That's what the Shroud wants." "Yes," Valea said, "and they now know exactly where they are." The emergency debrief took place in Kestrel's only proper meeting room, a repurposed ore assay lab that still smelled faintly of solvents. Valea sat at one end of the scarred table, cuffs dormant again, feeling very much like the dangerous artifact everyone kept glancing at. Rowan sat beside her, solid and quiet. Arlo had been sent home under protest and strict orders to stay inside. Across from them, Imani paced, anger keeping her upright. Beside her stood a man Valea hadn't met yet, thin and precise, with a permanent squint and a datapad clutched like a shield. "Harper," Rowan said, "stop glaring at her like she kicked your recycler over. Without Valea, that dome would have failed." Chief Administrator Jonas Harper sniffed. "Our systems are not that fragile." "They are if somebody's inside them poking holes," Imani snapped. "And Valea saw the pattern before our software did." Harper scowled down at his pad. "Your report says external hostile modulation," he said. "From what source? We're not even on the network." "Not from outside the dome," Valea said. "From inside your infrastructure. Someone introduced a modulation loop at the environmental core. It spiraled toward the school sector." She tapped her cuffs lightly. "My tech is designed to sense and correct imbalances. That's why I knew it wasn't random. And why the people who built the weaponized version want these back." "Who exactly are we talking about?" Harper demanded. "The Dominion Shroud," she said. "They won the war back home. They believe atmosphere is just another battlefield. Starve a city of oxygen, cook a valley under a magnified sun, strip the protective layers off a rival's crops." "You can do all that with those things?" Harper's face went oddly pale. "No," Valia said. "I can undo it with these. The Shroud built a different set. Crueler, less precise. Those are the ones I trashed before I ran." "You expect us to believe," Harper said, "that a paramilitary faction from a war half the sector away cares about one mining outpost enough to infiltrate it and sabotage our dome just to, what? Steal your bracelets?" Valia met his skepticism with flat calm. "I expect you to believe the evidence of your own sensors," she said. "You can keep doubting the story. The physics doesn't care." Imani dropped into a chair, rubbing her face. "Harper, somebody with serious technical chops tried to kill our kids to get leverage," she said. "I don't give a recycled bolt whether they're called the Shroud, the Cloak, or the Frilly Pink Brigade. They're real." Rowan's hand brushed Valea's under the table, a small grounding contact. "Assume she's right," he said. "What's the move?" Harper hesitated, then exhaled. "We're required to report any security breach of this scale to the Corp," he said. "They'll send an auditor, maybe a military liaison. Until then, we tighten internal access, lock down the environmental core physically, double shifts on security." "That won't stop a Shroud agent already embedded here," Guillemot, Valia said. "They're patient. They burrow into communities as teachers, medics, shipping clerks, anyone with routine system access and a reason to be near vulnerable populations." Imani swore softly. "Teachers," she said. "You're saying one of my staff might be—" "I'm saying someone with access to the school's emergency protocols helped the dome lock people in instead of releasing them," Valea said. "Check the logs." Harper's fingers flew. Lines of data scrolled. His frown deepened. "Someone with level 3 clearance bypassed 3 safety interlocks, Dummer," he said. "Less than an hour before the failure. The authorization hash looks like—" He swallowed. "It looks like Ms. Okafor's." Imani surged to her feet. "That's not possible," she snapped. "She's been here since before I shipped in. She took a pay cut to stay when the Corp slashed education funding. That's what makes her a good vector," Valea said quietly. "Trust buys access." Imani's eyes flashed. "Or someone cloned her hash." "Also possible," Valea said. "The Shroud loves muddying the trail." Harper pinched the bridge of his nose. "We'll detain Okafor for questioning," he said, "and audit everyone with level 3 or higher access. Until we know where the breach is, those—" He nodded at Valea's cuffs. "Stay as far from core systems as possible." "Harper," Rowan said warningly. "We're grateful for Ms. Rin's assistance," Harper said, hands spread in placation. "But we can't pretend her presence isn't a gigantic security liability." "Your presence is a gigantic liability," Imani muttered. "We cope." Valea bit back a smile that had no business being there. "I understand," she said instead. "I'll keep my interference minimal unless you ask for it." She didn't add that if the Shroud pushed again, she'd act whether Harper liked it or not. As the meeting broke, Imani caught Valea's arm. "Hey," she said, tone rough but sincere. "You saved my students. I don't forget debts like that." "You owe me nothing," Valea said. Your people pulled the physical levers. I just hummed at the air. Amani snorted. Hum louder next time, she said, and try not to die. Rowan's finally sleeping more than 3 hours a night. Valia watched her go, then turned to find Rowan waiting by the door. You all right? He asked. I've had worse days, she said. Fewer children, more artillery. Comforting, he said dryly. They stepped out into the main corridor. Overhead, the dome's hum had settled into a less frantic note. Valea's cuffs sat warm and heavy against her skin like coiled springs. You were right, he said quietly, about it not being an accident that you landed here. The shroud doesn't waste effort, she said. Someone diverted my pod to Kestrel for a reason. Rowan's hand brushed hers again, fingers hooking around her own almost without thought. Maybe the universe did too, he said. She looked down at their joined hands, then up at him. Her heart did something unfamiliar and reckless. This is a very inconvenient time to start liking you, Rowan Hale, she said. His mouth curved. Yeah, he said softly. Tell me about it. Life on Kestrel refused to pause for existential threats. The refinery still demanded ore. The Corp still pinged Harper for progress reports. Kids still had lessons, even if they now did evacuation drills twice as often as fire drills. Valea fell into the Hale household like she'd been designed to slot there. In the mornings she walked Arlo to school, her cuffs disguised again as simple jewelry. They timed their route so he could show her every shortcut, every half-secret alley, every vent that rattled when the wind hit it just right. Ms. Okafor isn't here, he said one day, frowning at the staff roster projected by the school entrance. They put Mr. Taro on our class instead. Ms. Okafor's helping the grown-ups with some questions, Valea said carefully. Sometimes adults get pulled into boring meetings. Arlo made a face. Grown-ups love meetings. You have no idea, she said. In the afternoon, she helped Rowan with whatever system was groaning loudest. A failing recycler, a pump on its last gears, a segment of the dome field that flickered under dust storms. She didn't plug her cuffs into the main grid again. Harper had made it clear the Corp preferred their air unenchanted, but she offered suggestions, subtle nudges. Your filters clog because the airflow's too laminar, she said, peering into a vent. Introduce a controlled turbulence here and the particulates will settle in the trap instead of the duct walls. Rowan glanced at her, then made the adjustment. When the sensor reports came back cleaner, he didn't say I told you so for Harper's benefit, but his eyes told her anyway. Arlo hovered whenever he could, firing questions like tracer rounds. Did you really live underground during the war? He asked one evening, as Valea recalibrated his prosthetic with Rowan's tools. For 3 years, she said, our sky wasn't safe. Too many drones, too many guns pointed up. Were you scared? Yes, she said, a lot. Being scared and doing what you have to do anyway are not opposites. Rowan, at the workbench, gave her a quick look of respect. Arlo considered that. Mom used to say that, he murmured, about going planet-side during storms. Valea glanced up. What was she like? She asked softly. He brightened. Awesome. She built stuff from nothing. She'd look at a pile of junk and see a greenhouse. She let me come to the tunnel sometimes and help set up sensor spikes. Dad freaked out the first time, said I should be playing with other kids, not crawling around in rock falls. Leon didn't listen to me much when she'd made up her mind, Rowan said, but his tone held more fondness than reproach. She was right about most things. Was she right about mom-level advice? Valea asked Arlo, clicking a new alignment setting into place. Like what? Only marry someone who makes the air feel easier to breathe. Rowan choked on his coffee. Arlo blinked, then grinned wickedly. Totally, he said. She also said Dad needed someone who would argue with him and win sometimes or he'd get impossible. Rowan pointed his mug at him. Traitor. Valea laughed. The sound startled her. It had been so long since laughter felt like a reflex instead of a defense. That night, After Arlo had finally gone to bed, Rowan found Valea on the narrow porch staring up at the stars through the thin dome. On her homeworld, the sky had been a distant, distorted memory for years. Here it was raw, immediate, sharp points of light fighting through dust. Kestrel's star, a pale gold thing, had slipped below the horizon, leaving the dome washed in cold grays. "You're vibrating," Rowan said quietly. She looked down at her hands. Her cuffs shimmered faintly, responding to some subliminal call. "The Shroud is patient but not idle," she said. "They'll try again. They always do." He leaned against the railing beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "You could leave," he said. "If we get you on that shuttle, the Corp could tuck you away on Helios with a dozen guards and a non-disclosure agreement." "Could," she agreed, "but you'd still be here. Arlo, the rest of Kestrel, a soft-skinned, stubborn little speck with a half-broken dome and a bullseye painted on its air." "Humans like specks," he said. "We're good at crawling into cracks." She turned to look at him. The porch light carved shadows along his jaw, softened the scar in his hairline, made his eyes look almost luminous. "I shouldn't care this much," she said quietly. "I was supposed to trade my autonomy for safety, not for this." "For what?" he asked, voice equally low. "For a kid who offers me fruit on a dust road," she said. "For an engineer who drives like a demon and trusts me with his air and his sun. For a community that argues in emergency meetings and still shows up with tools when it matters." He swallowed. "You care," he said. "We notice." Silence stretched between them, charged with all the things neither quite dared say. Rowan cleared his throat. "Valea," he said, "about earlier when you—" "Dad?" Arlo's voice drifted from inside, sleepy and small. "I had a bad dream." Rowan exhaled, half frustration, half fondness. "Duty calls." Valea smiled. "Go," she said. "I'll be here." He paused long enough to touch her shoulder, fingers warm through thin fabric. "Yeah," he said, "you will." And somehow that promise settled into her bones like gravity. The ship arrived 4 days later. There was no warning ping on the inbound traffic log, no scheduled docking request. One moment Kestrel's thin sky hummed with usual dust and distant orbital junk. The next, a sleek, dark, needle-shaped vessel knifed through the atmosphere as if the planet hadn't gotten the memo that it should resist. Valea saw it first, early morning light turning the hull into a streak of molten silver. She stood with Arlo in the school queue, listening to him complain about math, when the hull shutter sound rolled over the dome. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. "That isn't a supply hauler," one of the teachers murmured. "No transponder ID," crackled Harper's voice on the public channel a heartbeat later. "All units, this is Administrator Harper. Unscheduled inbound vessel approaching. Security to the landing pad." Arlo shaded his eyes, squinting up through the dome. "It looks like the ships from the fancy dramas," he said. "The ones rich people use when they don't want to touch dirt." Valea's stomach dropped. "It's Helios design," she said, "a director-class courier." She didn't remember starting to run, but suddenly she was pounding across the plaza, Arlo clattering after her on his prosthetic. "Valea," he puffed. "What is it?" "My mistake catching up," she said grimly. The courier kissed down on the transfer slab with obscene grace, barely disturbing the dust. Its hull cooled from white-hot to sleek gunmetal in seconds. A ramp unfolded with practice theater. Rowan and Imani arrived from opposite directions, both slightly out of breath. Harper was already there, smoothing his shirt like that would make him less obviously rattled. "Any chance that's a benevolent surprise?" Rowan asked Valea. "No," she said. "After that's Director Sloan Cade." The man who descended the ramp looked exactly as he had in the contract holocalls. Tall, mid-40s, hair silvered at the temples in a way that probably cost extra, features handsome in a manufactured way. His suit was Helios black with subtle gold trim, like he'd stepped out of a recruitment ad. He carried himself like someone used to rooms adjusting around him. His gaze went straight to Valea. "Ms. Rin," he said, smiling smoothly. "At last." Her spine stiffened automatically. "Director Cade," she said, "you're far from Helios." "A regrettable necessity," he said. "When your pod failed to arrive, our tracking showed it diverted to this facility. Frontier Match claimed a routing glitch. I don't believe in glitches." "Join the club," Rowan muttered. Cade's eyes flicked to him, taking in the dust-stained coveralls, the burn on his sleeve, the stubborn set of his shoulders, discounting him in a breath. "And you are?" Cade asked, clearly indulging a formality. "Rowan Hale," Rowan said, "Chief Engineer. The one keeping the air you're breathing marginally breathable." Imani stepped in. "Imani Chen Security," she said, "and I'd appreciate seeing your authorization to drop in unannounced, Director." Cade produced a hollow seal with the easy arrogance of someone who always has the right paperwork. "Helios Oversight," he said. "Kestrel is technically under our administrative umbrella. I am here to retrieve a contract partner, assess a security situation, and ensure no proprietary technology has fallen into unauthorized hands." His gaze brushed Valea's cuffs pointedly. Rowan's hand flexed at his side. Valea resisted the urge to cover the cuffs. "You knew the Shroud was after the harmonics tech," she said quietly. "That's why you wanted a partner from my world." "Helios oversees half a dozen terraforming projects, Cade said. "We'd be criminally negligent not to track developments in atmospheric manipulation. Your work could help us stabilize whole worlds, save countless lives." "Or vacuum the air out of cities that don't pay," Rowan said. Cade's smile cooled. "You think small, Mr. Hale?" "No," Rowan said. "I think local." Alarms chose that moment to begin screaming. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Imani slapped her calm. "Talk to me." "Environmental spike at the ore pits," came a panicked voice. "Pressure drop and heat surge. Sensors say it's a core glitch, but it looks like the last time," Valea finished. She looked at Cade. "Did they follow you, or did you follow them?" His jaw tightened. "The Shroud has been sniffing around Helios projects for months," he said. "I suspected they'd intercept your pod. When the routing data pointed here, I came personally." "To rescue your asset," Rowan said. "To prevent a destabilizing technology from falling into hostile hands," Cade snapped. "If you'd rather argue semantics while your pit crews boil in their suits, be my guest." Imani was already moving. "We can fight after," she said. "Everybody with a badge, with me. Valea." "I'm coming," Valea said. Rowan grabbed her arm. "Arlo," he said. "Go home. Stay there. Lock the door." Arlo's face went tight. "I can help," he protested. "You can help by being somewhere I'm not afraid to breathe," Rowan said roughly. "Please." Arlo swallowed whatever brave retort was forming and nodded. "Okay," he said. "Don't die." "No plans to," Rowan said. They ran for the rovers. The courier ship sat sleek and predatory on the pad behind them, its hull reflecting the brittle sky. For the first time since she'd stepped out of her misrouted pod, Valea wondered whether the worst danger to Kestrel was outside the dome, or standing right beside her. The ore pits were a jagged wound in the planet's skin. From the rover, the excavation site looked like a series of giant bites taken out of the rust-red plain. Conveyor belts crawled along the edges, carrying chunks of ore toward the refinery. Workers in pressure suits clustered in nervous groups near the access hatches, staring warily at the shimmering air above the deepest shafts. The atmosphere over Pit 3 rippled like a mirage. Sensors on the rover's dash spat conflicting readings. Pressure up, pressure down, temperature spiking and plunging in rapid alternation. "Somebody's playing the whole site like a drum," Valea said, knuckles white on the grab rail. "If that gradient flips hard, you'll get a localized vacuum pocket. Anyone caught in it will suffocate before they can cycle their suit." "And if the pressure spikes instead?" Imani asked, gunning the rover toward the control tower. "Then the shafts blow like geysers Trubkur," Rowan said grimly, "and we get to swim in molten ore and shrapnel." "Options?" Imani demanded. Valea's cuffs were already flowering into their active configuration. alien symbols chasing each other around her forearms. She closed her eyes briefly, tuning out the roar of engines, the shouts, the grind of conveyor belts. She dove into the air. Not physically, but with the part of her mind that understood gas not as an invisible nothing but as a sea of particles and waves. The shroud's modulation patterns reared up like familiar ghosts, sawtooth pulses, deliberate phase shifts. They've attached their loop directly to your environmental core, she said, using it as an amplifier. Their goal isn't just to hurt your workers, it's to push your dome into a failure cascade. Take it offline, Rowan said. He said, we can run on backup scrubbers for a while. They're inefficient, but they've booby-trapped the cutoff, Valea said. If we drop the core, their loop slams to maximum and you get a shockwave through the dome. So our choice is slow death or quick death, Imani said. That's a crap menu. We make a third option, Valea said through her teeth. She jumped from the rover before it fully stopped. The wind at the pit's edge yanked at her coat. Heat radiated up from the depths, carrying metallic tang. Closer to the shimmer, breathing felt wrong, like each inhale was a second late. She walked straight toward the bad air. Rowan swore behind her. Valea! She ignored him. Standing at the edge, toes almost over the cut stone, she lifted her arms and fed more power into the cuffs than she had since the day she'd burned her research station, rather than let the shroud take it. Her interfaces roared to life. The world dropped away. She wasn't on Kestrel. She was inside the planet's thin skin of gas, riding the shock waves, seeing the shroud's interference as a lattice of cold white spikes threaded through her own old code. Sloppy, she said, not sure if she said it aloud. They'd taken fragments of her original harmonics work, stolen in raids, ripped from dead colleagues' consoles, and built brutal, efficient weapons out of them. She felt each misuse like a bruise. Not today. Valea extended her reach, not just smoothing the local anomalies, but rewriting the way the core talked to the dome. She seized control of the feedback loops the shroud had hijacked and retuned them, pushing their invasive pattern into a blind alley. The shimmer over Pit 3 stabilized, then sagged into a more natural heat ripple. Sensor readings on the rover's dash dropped from frantic red to cautious amber. Her cuffs burned, her muscles shook. Somewhere distant, she heard Imani yelling into her comm that the spikes were dropping. The spikes were dropping. Cute, said a voice behind her. It was female, amused, and carried a harmonic undertone so like her own that Valea's stomach clenched. She turned. The woman standing a few meters away wore a Kestrel Environmental Tech's coveralls. Her hair was pulled back in a practical knot. She held a diagnostic slate in one hand. Her eyes, however, were wrong. They were colorless near the pupil, darkening outward, pupils slit like Valea's, but vertical in both directions, an X-shaped aperture that gleamed when the light caught it. Shroud. You always were dramatic, Rin, the woman said conversationally, bleeding yourself half dry to prove a point. Valea's hands trembled. Her cuffs hissed, cooling. Maris, she said, they sent you? Maris Vec had been her colleague once, one of the sharpest minds in harmonics design. She'd also been the first to suggest applying their work to siege scenarios. Valea still remembered the look on her face when the council had voted to fund defensive applications. Who else? Maris smiled thinly. Your signature's been lighting up our scopes ever since you landed here. My backers want their toys back. Imani and Rowan reached Valea's side, breathless. Imani's hand hovered near her sidearm. Rowan's hovered near Valea's back. Friend of yours? Rowan asked. Former, Valea said. It's turned war criminal. Maris's gaze flicked. To Rowan. Ah, she said. The local attachment. Humans do get under the skin, don't they? Her tone made it sound like an infection. You tried to suffocate school children to draw me out, Valea said. We're a little past collegial banter. Maris rolled her shoulders. For a second, the illusion of human muscle movement wavered. revealing the denser, triple-stranded tendons of their shared species. She let the shimmer drop, revealing skin the same violet as Valea's, but marked with the Shroud's spiral tattoos. "You're the one who ran with half the project," Maris said. "You left us with ruined prototypes and corpses. We had to improvise." "You had to stop," Valea snapped. "We were never supposed to turn air into a weapon. We were fixing worlds, repairing damage." "Why not both?" Maris asked. "The galaxy respects strength, Valea. We offer breathable skies to those who pay, and to those who don't." She spread her hands, as if the rest were self-evident. "Not here," Valea said. "Not these people." Maris's gaze sharpened. "You can't stay everywhere you care about," she said softly. "You're one woman with two prototype cuffs. The Shroud is a doctrine." Rowan stepped subtly between them, just enough that Maris would have to go through him to reach Valea. "You're right about one thing," he said, "or she can't be everywhere." He glanced back at Valea. "But humans can." His voice carried, reaching the groups of pit workers who'd approached warily once the air had stabilized. They were rough, tired, underpaid. They were also listening. "We've been living on the edge of vacuum since this place was founded," Rowan said, eyes never leaving Maris. "We've patched the holes the Corp doesn't care about. We've dragged each other out of collapses. We've buried our dead and gone back on shift." He jerked his chin toward Valea. "When she showed up, we didn't vote on whether she was a liability. We just put her at our table and watched what she did when the alarms went off." Amani snorted softly but stood straight, one hand on her holster, the other on her comm. "You want those cuffs?" Rowan asked Maris. "You go through all of us." Around them, miners hefted tools in a way that made it clear they could become weapons. A tech unclipped a plasma cutter. Someone else kicked a crate toward Rowan's feet, making a crude barricade line. Valea felt something shift in the air that wasn't pressure. It was will. It was the thing she'd only ever read about in old net stories, the point where humans took the entire galaxy's contempt, shrugged, and said, "No, actually." "HFY," she thought, "not as a joke, as a fact." Maris's lip curled. "You think a handful of dirt-grubbing primates can stop a doctrine?" she asked. "Your core don't care about you. My backers don't care about you. You're dust." "We're the dust that gets in the gears," Imani said. "Ask anyone who's tried to run this place on a spreadsheet." Maris's eyes flicked toward the horizon, where the courier ship's hull gleamed faintly behind the distant refinery. "And you've invited Helios into the dance," she said. "How predictable." Cade's voice crackled over Imani's comm a second later. "Chin," he said, "we're picking up an unauthorized signal, piggybacking on your environmental channel, masked as noise. I can jam it from here for a few minutes, but you need to cut the source." "Working on it," Imani said. She glanced at Valea. "Source?" Maris winked. Valea acted. Her cuffs flared, targeting not the dome this time, but the narrow pocket of twisted air around Maris's body. The Shroud had always built their personal field tech lazily, trusting in intimidation more than subtlety. Maris was no exception. Valea grabbed that field and inverted it. Maris staggered as her balance vanished. The harmonics around her collapsed into micro-eddies that tugged her sideways. Her signal stuttered. "Now," Valea gasped. Imani fired. The stun charge slammed into Maris's chest, wrapped in a sheath of Valea-bent air that punched it deeper than human physics should have allowed. Maris went down hard, muscles locking. The odd pressure in the pit dissipated. The air at last was just air. They chained Maris in an old maintenance cell beneath the admin block. Corp Reg said high-risk detainees should be shipped off-world immediately. Harper was already drafting the report. Cade offered the use of his courier's secure hold for the safety of all parties. Imani told them both, cheerfully, to go to hell. "She tried to suffocate my kid," she said. "She stays where I can look her in the eye until the council shows up to take her somewhere with bigger bars." Cade managed a diplomatic smile. "Of course, Chief Chen," he said. In the meantime, I'll assist Ms. Rin with shoring up your environmental deficiencies. Valea watched him warily. You want access to my designs. I want to avoid another incident, he said smoothly, and to understand how you mitigated their attack so effectively. If we're to roll out any version of this technology on Helios projects, we need to ensure the Shroud can't piggyback again. Rowan stood at Valea's shoulder, arms crossed. You mean you want to sell breathable air to more planets, he said, with Valea's conscience bolted on as a safety valve. Cade's gaze moved between them. Is it so incomprehensible, he said quietly, that I might have more than one motive? Yes, Rowan and Valea said together. He sighed. Very well, he said, some of the polished veneer slipping. I grew up in a slum on Mars, Mr. Hale. We paid for oxygen by the minute. When the pumps failed, we suffocated in the dark until someone bribed the right foreman to flip a switch. Valea blinked. That particular note hadn't been in his official bio. I climbed out of that hole, Cade said, and step by step, favor by favor, until I had enough influence to make sure no one in my jurisdiction would ever stand at an air kiosk and count their remaining coins before breathing. Atmospheric control is power. I would rather hold that power than leave it to the Shroud or the core. Helios is a corp, Rowan pointed out. A corp with ambitions beyond shareholder dividends, Cade said. Believe that or don't. It's still the least terrible option on the table. Valea studied him. The war had taught her to be suspicious of anyone who declared themselves the least terrible option, but she'd also learned to recognize genuine conviction. Say I believe you, she said. Say I help you design a version of the harmonics interface that can't be weaponized and can't be hijacked the way Maris tried. What do you offer Kestrel? Cade's eyebrows lifted. Negotiating on their behalf already? They patched my pod landing, fed me, sheltered me, and stood between me and the Shroud, she said. They're my people now. Rowan's breath caught. Cade's mouth curved. Very well. Kestrel becomes a testbed and training site, he said. We upgrade their dome, their scrubbers, their recyclers using your designs. In return, they allow Helios oversight teams to study the implementation with your sign-off. Council oversight too, Amani said from the doorway. She'd been listening, of course. I don't let one corpse swap places with another without a referee. Cade inclined his head. Council oversight, he agreed, and a full amnesty for Ms. Rin regarding any disputed ownership of the initial prototypes. That part I can get in writing, Valea said, from more than just you. Cade's smile sharpened. You negotiate like a boardroom shark, he said. Helios really would have suited you. Your HR department should have thought of that before letting my pod fall into a war zone, she said. Rowan huffed something that wanted to be a laugh and wasn't sure it was allowed. Going to Helios was your way out, he said quietly when Cade left, talking fast into his comm about council channels and emergency breaches. It was a version of out, Valea said. A gilded cage is still a cage. The Shroud would have found me there eventually, too. They like high-profile plays. And here? Rowan asked. Here they found a community willing to hit them with wrenches, she said. I like the odds better. They walked out onto the admin block's narrow balcony. Below, the settlement churned, still buzzing from the day's events. People repaired what needed repairing. Kids chased each other between habs, scattering when adults shouted. Arlo spotted them from the lane and waved so hard he nearly toppled. His new prosthetic, hastily patched with Rowan and Valea's combined expertise after the pit incident, flexed more smoothly now. He worships you, Rowan said, watching him. He worships you, Valea countered. I'm just new. You saved his life twice in 1 week, Rowan said. It doesn't take long for humans to imprint on that. Valea leaned against the railing. The dome hummed overhead in a steadier, healthier tone. Her cuffs sat warm and quiet, synced to the new parameters she'd quietly slipped into the system. You told Cade I was your people, Rowan said after a moment. His voice had gone soft around the edges. I told Cade the truth, she said simply. He exhaled, some of the tension he'd been carrying since the school incident finally bleeding out. That air thing, he said, about only marrying someone who makes it easier to breathe. Yes? He glanced at her, something raw and unguarded in his eyes. Feels like I've been holding my breath since Leon died, he said, since the tunnel collapsed, since Arlo screamed and then didn't. Her hand found his without conscious thought. His fingers curled around hers like they'd always belonged there. I know the sound when air comes back into a dead space, Valea said quietly. It's ugly and beautiful at the same time, like the first breath after drowning. He stepped closer. The dome's faint light painted his scar pale, his eyes dark. Stay, he said. Not a command, a plea. Not just until the council signs off, not just until Helios has what it wants. Stay because, he swallowed, because this house is less empty with you in it, because Arlo looks at you like the world's bigger again, because when the alarms go off, my first thought now is where is Valea, not where did it all go wrong. Her throat burned. On my world, she said, when we decide to bond with someone, we make a vow to share air, to keep each other breathing, literally and figuratively. It's not a light thing. Humans usually start with dinner, he said, a tremor of humor under the seriousness, but we can work our way up to vows. She laughed, wet and unsteady. I don't do anything halfway, Hale. I've noticed. He leaned in. The kiss was not dramatic. No dome flicker, no sudden hush of the crowd. Just the slide of his mouth against hers, careful at first, then deeper when she didn't pull away. His hand cupped her jaw, calloused thumb feathering the edge of her bioluminescent markings. Her fingers curled in his jacket. The air between them felt right, breathable. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, she whispered, Fine, I'll stay. He smiled, small and ferocious. Good, he said, because I was already planning where to put your tools in the workshop. 3 months later, nobody on Kestrel mentioned the word accident when they talked about Valea's arrival. The official reports called it a routing anomaly. Frontier Match's internal investigation used phrases like legacy code conflict and unexpected vector. The Shroud's encrypted channels, those Cade had quietly passed to Council intelligence, referred to it as Operation Net the Fish. On Kestrel, people just said, that was the day the air changed. The dome over the settlement no longer flickered like a faulty bulb. Under Valea's guidance and Helios's grudging funding, they'd installed a new hybrid field, one that used harmonics to flex under storms instead of cracking. The scrubbers hummed more quietly. The water reclaimers produced slightly less awful coffee. Arlo's leg was now a gleaming amalgam of human engineering and alien insight. The socket fit better. The servos responded faster. He'd insisted on etching lightning bolts into the shin strut. Functional, Valea had observed, watching him sprint along the lane without the old hitch. Intimidating, Arlo had corrected. Bandits will fear me. Bandits don't come to Kestrel, Rowan had pointed out. They might, Arlo said. We have better air now. Valea split her days between Kestrel's systems hub and remote sessions with a Helios design team that oscillated between awed and terrified of her. She refused to send them raw harmonics code. Instead, she pushed them towards simpler, safer versions that could be implemented without her cuffs. She insisted every rollout plan include emergency shutoffs she controlled. You're building filters into the politics, Cade complained on one call. Yes, she said, atmospheric and moral. Cade sighed, but he didn't argue. Too loudly. The Shroud, for the moment, kept their distance. Maris had been transferred under heavy guard to a council black site. Before she'd gone, she'd leaned through the bars of her cell and smiled at Valea. You can't hold your breath forever, she'd said. I don't have to, Valea had replied. I have help now. Maris had laughed. We'll see. Maybe the Shroud would come back. Maybe another faction would rise, smelling opportunity in the thin air between stars. The galaxy was not short on bastards. But Kestrel, that stubborn speck of rust and will, had teeth now. On an evening when the dust lay relatively quiet and the dome hummed low, Valia stood on the Hale porch watching the kids of the settlement chase each other under the fake twilight. Arlo led the pack, his prosthetic flashing, laughing like the sound itself was an act of defiance. Rowan slipped an arm around her waist from behind, chin resting on her shoulder. Admin Harper says the council wants to formalize you as Kestrel's chief environmental architect, he said, capital letters and everything. Do I get a hat? She asked. Probably a stack of forms. Less fun. You already do the job, he pointed out. That's not the same as admitting it, she said, but it's a start. Behind them, the house was full of noise. Imani and a few other friends had crammed into the tiny living area to help plan what humans insisted on calling a wedding and Valea's people called a bonding. There were arguments about food, about music, about how many chairs could physically fit under the Hale roof before the floor collapsed. On my world, we release a controlled burst of ionized vapor during the ceremony to symbolize shared breath, Valea said. Rowan winced. Imani's going to insist on a fire extinguisher. Understandable. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Cade says he's coming, he added. Claims he wants to see the first human Arathi bond ceremony up close. He wants to make sure his atmospheric consultant doesn't sign any contracts that conflict with his. She smiled. But he also wants to see Arlo's face when we give him his official job as junior systems tech. Rowan chuckled. Kid's going to explode. Valia watched Arlo cut across the yard, prosthetic leg barely distinguishable from his bio one in the smoothness of his movement. When I left home, she said quietly, I thought I was selling myself to a man who saw me as an asset. My work, my tech, my uterus, all neat in a little box on his spreadsheet. You did, Rowan said, for about 5 minutes. And then the universe misdelivered the package, she said. He snorted. You know, he said, if someone's writing this down somewhere, they're going to title it something like Alien Bride Shipped to the Wrong Address. But everything changed when she met his prosthetic-legged son. Valia groaned. You've been watching too many HFY reels. Arlo keeps sending them to me, he said. Look, Dad, this one's about a guy who duct tapes an engine back together in a war zone and gets adopted by aliens. They're not wrong about duct tape. She leaned back against him. Humanity has a reputation in the wider galaxy, you know, reckless, sentimental, impossible. Sounds about right. And yet, she said, when my world burned, none of your shiny admirals or council envoys came to pull us out. No fleets, no heroic speeches, just a misrouted pod and a man who decided to open his door when a stranger knocked. He was quiet for a moment. We're not the heroes of the galaxy, he said finally. We're just too stubborn to stop trying. That's what heroism is, she said. From where I'm standing. He squeezed her. From where I'm standing, he murmured. It's having someone who can talk down a murderous weather pattern and still remember how I take my coffee. Poorly, she said with too much sugar. Blasphemy. Arlo peeled away from the group of kids and barreled toward them, skidding to a halt with all the grace of a meteor. Is it true? He demanded, eyes wide. Imani says you're officially bonding and I get to be in charge of the air filters for the ceremony. Valea shot Rowan a look. You told Imani before you told him? She asked. She was in the room when we picked the date, Rowan protested. Arlo was at school. Arlo bounced. So is it true? It's true, Valea said. We're formalizing what the universe started when it misfiled my shipping code. And I get a job? You've had a job for months, Rowan said. We're just paying you now, in snacks. Arlo whooped. Best day ever. He bolted back toward the house, already yelling about filters and vent harmonics. Valea watched him go, then looked up at the dome. It pulsed once in her perception, a slow, steady heartbeat. This place shouldn't exist, she said, not with the way the galaxy is, a tiny settlement on a barely viable rock, held together by spit and stubbornness and recycled pipe. We exist anyway, Rowan said, that's the point. Humanity, she said softly. Yeah. He laughed into her hair. Welcome home, Valea Rin. She turned in his arms and kissed him under a dome held up by hacked-together systems, alien tech, and an entire community that refused to let their air and each other go quietly. Somewhere, in the cold stretches between stars, the Shroud plotted their next move. Empires jockeyed for territory, corps schemed around boardroom tables. On Kestrel 3, a misdelivered bride and a single father made plans for a ceremony that would share breath, vows, and the ongoing project of keeping a fragile little pocket of atmosphere livable. It wasn't tidy, it wasn't safe, but it was theirs. And in a wide, indifferent universe, that was everything. The end. If you enjoyed this HFY story, don't forget to hit like, drop a comment about your favorite moment, and subscribe for more human-alien love, stubborn courage, and frontier chaos. Your support helps these stories reach more listeners and keeps the channel going strong.